yeah. Welcome back, guys, to another edition of the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. And I am your co-host, Ray Russell, here again this week to aid in bringing you another great, fun-filled time of stories and memories from the life and times of Bob Roop himself. And last we left off, we were leaving the Dallas territory. Bob going to make a quick stop back home in Florida before taking off to his second tour of Japan. And that is what we're getting into today here on the program as we head off to the All Japan promotion circa 1974. And in order to do that, time to bring the host himself back onto the show to take us back to memory lane once more. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back, Bob Roop.
Well, hey, Ray, and hi out there, folks. I'm glad to be back telling some more stories, tales. I think tales sounds better than stories. Stories are something like that are made up. These tales are true. I mean, for the most part, they might be embellished. Who knows? But of course, those would only be the stories or tales that were told to me, because I would never embellish a story. You know, I tell it, yeah, exactly like it happened. Well, there's two old wrestling truisms or maxims. It's my story. I can tell it any way I want to.
There you go.
Any story worth telling is worth embellishing. That was a Nick Bockwinkel quote. He's one that, as far as I know, let's put it this way, he was the originator of that philosophy. To my knowledge, he might have heard it from someone else, but Nick would say that with a smile because he liked to tell stories too.
Sure. Yeah, Nick was a pretty phenomenal character, but top of the morning to you, Bob. I'm doing everything to avoid going outside into this humid weather right now. No rain in sight, nearly almost 100 every day with humidity, and I'm cool sitting in here recording with you. So it's going to be a fun time. We'll talk about the hot world of Dallas, Texas. That's what we did last time out. You're leaving the state of Texas here. The last recorded matchup, you lose a match to Red Bastien on June the 4th. You pop back up a week later in Tampa working Harley Race on June the 11th. You have a few matches here over the next couple weeks. Greg Valentine, Buddy Colt, Bobby Duncombe. You finish up June 24th, so you're just back in Tampa, just long enough to say hello and goodbye as you pack your bags on a plane, leaving on a jet plane off to All Japan, the All Japan promotion this time around. Last time it was the JWA. This time, now you're working for the Giant Baba, who he left the JWA back in 72 and formed his own promotion here, All Japan promotion, and the Summer Action Series Tour is what you'll be a part of.
Right. That was a good tour. Yeah. When I went the first time several years earlier, Baba and Inoki, Antonio Inoki, still work with, I believe was it All Japan Pro Wrestling?
The JWA, because this is the All Japan, yeah.
Right. Okay. And then I'm not sure what the actual times were that they did it, but Inoki and Baba got so big that they were, their stature as drawing cards got so big that they were able to hook up with, and both of them hooked up with television companies.
Right.
So, we immediately had amazing power to be able to put yourself on TV and, do whatever you wanted. You could beat everybody in the country except maybe the Emperor of Japan. And yeah, the situation had changed, but it was basically the same as going over there as a foreigner, being on tour there. You were living out of your suitcase. Now, again, you were in a way living out of your suitcase working back in the United States. In some territories, in the Carolinas, usually no matter what circuit you were on, they had a couple of different circuits there, but no matter which one you were on, usually there was a layover, at least one or two nights where you had to stay over because the next town wasn't that far away, or it made no sense to drive like 300 miles back to Charlotte and then drive 250 miles back kind of in the same direction the next day. Guys would just stay over. So you were living out of a suitcase in that sense. But in Japan, you were living out of a suitcase the whole time because you never got home. So, but you're used to it, and in a way, it can be exotic if you're young to the business. It can be all this new stuff and new things to see and experience. I imagine after your 10th tour, it might seem very familiar to the point of familiarity does breed contempt, even the nicest of situations. I remember doing one of my ways to lose weight was the Atkins diet, which was a low carb diet, and you could eat all the protein you wanted. And so I started having steak and eggs for breakfast. And by about the fourth day, I was tired of it. I wanted some cereal or something. I said, oh, steak again. So familiarity does breed contempt. So that was my example of it.
So I'm looking at the tour here. We got lots of names to get into, but before we do that, just a quick question, because I do want to save time for all of these players that are going to be part of this tour. But I was curious, you worked over there for the JWA. Now you're going back for a completely different promotion. Giant Baba's in charge. Do you recall anything major, a major change in how things were done here? Was it better? Was it the same? Was it not as good as far as your travel or your hotel or just the way you felt comfortable over there?
No, I didn't. I wasn't making a comparison, and everything was fine. I mean, it was organized. You weren't ever left out in the woods by yourself. You were taken care of. I went over there with the idea after the first tour, 7 weeks where we worked in 30 cities and had to go to 30 different cities. You just get used to it. So it's kind of the same routine. You're in your hotel, you go down to the lobby and wait, and then the representative for the wrestling company gets there and it shows you where the bus is, and you get on the bus, you go to the town, whatever it takes. Might be a airplane ride or a flight, it might ensue a boat, a bus, or a train, or all of the above. At the end of the day, by the evening, you would be in whatever town you're supposed to be working in. So you got used to that routine, and there was never much variation from that. I mean, you were never like on a train that was nasty and dirty, and you were back in the back with smoke from the smokestack coming through the car. Everything was always first class, in terms of the way you were treated. Very efficient people, the Japanese. There was never any big hiccups or delays or like in Australia, I talked about having to drive almost halfway across the country one time because the airline fuel handlers, I think it was, went on strike. That didn't happen, at least not while I was there. It didn't in Japan. That didn't happen in Japan. Always, your bus was always there. Wherever we went, we very seldom ever had to wait, sit around waiting. We were usually on the move. Well, actually, the first place we got where we had a chance to sit down for a while and stay in one place was when we got to the venue where we were going to be working that evening. So, no, I didn't notice a change.
So it's still the same planes, trains, automobiles, boats, whatever the case may be to get you where you need to go. Think about that for a minute, guys. In the States here, okay, I'm working New York today and I got to be in Dallas tomorrow. You hop on a flight and maybe there's a layover, but you're going to get to Dallas. But especially back then, but throughout these Japan tours, whoever was in charge of that part of the office, getting all of these guys on there, because like you said, you may have to take a bus, a train, and a boat on, just in one route to go to one city. So somebody had to be in charge of making sure all of that was perfect timed and you guys got to where you needed to be. And it went off without a hitch as usual. So people know what they were doing in the office, at least, as this is still a fledgling company. All Japan's only 2 years old at this point as you come over here. Baba started this back in 72. Like you said, they got, too big for the JWA, and they formed their own promotion. Inoki would follow because he's not going to be outdone. And
right.
Here you are on the tour, All Japan, and you've got a few gaijin, they call them. That's the foreign talent guys, for those who don't know. And one of the names that sticks out to me immediately is a future nearly 6-year WWF heavyweight champion. Bob Backlund's on this tour, but that's big in and of itself, seeing Bob Roop and Bob Backlund, the two amateur Bobs, on the same tour. And you will team with Bob some here. There's a match, as you pointed out, on YouTube out there of you guys together working Baba and Jumbo Tsuruta. But
right.
I noticed here, because it's 74, I said, Bob Backlund couldn't have been in the business very long. And I go back, and he broke in the fall of 1973. Here we are in the summer of 74. He's a rookie Bob. Backlund has not even been in the professional wrestling business for a year yet, and now he's your tag team partner.
Yeah, he was green, but he was very good. If you look at that match, I didn't see any real gaffes on his part. He wasn't streamlined like some like a Pat Patterson, for example, where
sure
you don't notice. Yeah, he knew, but he was fine. You wouldn't know that he was that green. I remember my story about my first match over there when I was about the same length of time in the business he was. I was much less efficient, and plus he looked great too. He had that great build, and he was always working out. In the dressing room, he was doing push-ups and squats and just constantly conditioning himself. And he did that his whole career, as far as I know.
Bob had some superhuman strength. He's one of those deceptively strong guys, that's for sure.
Yeah. If you condition yourself, over the period of decades, you do build up a basic strength. Even at my advanced age, I still have a lot of strength left just from my wrestling days. Mm-hmm. And I haven't built on that strength in a couple of decades. I haven't done any powerlifting or anything for quite some time. But I still have some of the strength left from all the years I put in as an amateur. When you're tied up with another guy, you're exerting every muscle in your body because you have to protect every area in your body needs to be ready to react to whatever's going to happen. You can't just let your legs relax because in a split second it takes you send a message down there, hey, wake up. Your opponent might get a little bit, it's only a millisecond of an advantage. By the time you react, he's in a position to do something offensive to you that, like take you down, for example, take you off your feet. So, and so Bob not only had all that amateur wrestling behind him, but again, he was constantly exercising. Even on this tour, he would work out in the dressing room.
And Bob's actually going to become a semi-regular in the Florida territory. He's going to be there off and on for basically the remainder of his time prior to becoming the WWF champion later in New York City. So Backlund's going to be familiar with the fans all around the United States. And of course, a big proponent of his was Eddie Graham, who the story goes was one of these several promoters. He, Vern, and I believe it was Muchnick, went to Vince Sr., who was looking for the next quote-unquote Bruno at the time, and they said, why don't you give this Bob Backlund guy a try? And the rest, as they say, is history. But do you recall, it doesn't have to necessarily be in Japan, do you recall any stories or anything that really, sticks out to you in regards to Bob Backlund outside of his amateur background, a hell of a talent, and, a hell of a pro, too, right out of the gate?
Well, I'm sitting here as you were building that question. Mm-hmm. I started thinking about an answer, and Bob, again, I didn't hang around with him in private because he was clean living and I wasn't. He wasn't a drinker. He didn't do any drugs. And I wasn't a serious druggie, but I got into pot, and,
yeah, I can see how you guys wouldn't hang in the same circles, but still be cool with each other, obviously.
Well, he was younger. He was I don't know, at least 5, 6, 10, maybe 10 years younger. Not 10, but right. Probably 5 years younger than me. But Bob wouldn't, I never saw him in a bar. I never saw him like smoking a cigarette or chewing tobacco or doing anything that wasn't like a healthy kind of experience. He was always taking care of himself, and he looked it. It paid off for him.
Yeah, I do know there's stories later on. I don't know if he was doing it way back here in the early 70s. I truly believe that Bob was very much paying attention to his future here in the world of wrestling. Now, there are stories later on that for the good guy image that Bob Backlund was, and don't get me wrong, he absolutely was that guy. He wouldn't swear in front of, people and this, that, and the other, all this stuff to keep that build up as a top baby face and someone you can look up to. But I also heard that on the kayfabe side now, Bob could throw back some beers. He can keep up with some people with some beers. Now, I don't know if he was doing that back here in the early 70s, but at least he loosened up a little bit and would drink a beer or two later on. But not that you need to do that to be successful, but it's good to know that he kind of unwinded with some of the boys at some point in his career. But I was just curious, your take on Bob Backlund, because he wasn't an Olympic wrestler, but he was a hell of an amateur wrestler. And if of all the guys that was able to bring that over to the pros and make it work for as many years as he did, I would say that Backlund was successful in being that mat technician, where he could, expose people to a different world other than, say, the Bruno, the kick, the punch, the backdrop, the type of thing. Right. Backlund came in there, brought a completely different style, showed the New York world, the new Northeast, a different level of quote unquote wrestling, what it would be, where you're more used to it down there in Florida. So, you guys are very similar in many ways to me as a fan watching on TV. You guys, you incorporate a lot of that amateur stuff, but you're also, you understand this is the pros and we got to be entertaining at the same time.
Right. The major difference between Bob Backlund and myself is that I think at heart I was a heel, and I don't mean being evil or nasty.
Natural heel.
Natural heel, yeah. Mm-hmm. Last year on my bus route, I had three of the kids on the bus assaulted me, and it wasn't anything.
Sounds like they're the heels, Bob.
Yes, it wasn't anything I did. It was just they were all special ed kids, and they had defiance, disobedience disorders, and all that. But when I say assault, they didn't attack me with a knife or a gun. They just smacked me or kicked me or whatever. But so I used to say, well, I haven't lost it. I'm still that natural heel. Even grade school kids want to punch me out. So
having flashbacks with that narrow bus, aisleway there. It's like coming back down to ringside there. You gotta watch yourself.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, the heel role for me was freedom. As a baby face, you had to be nice. Yeah. At times, you just had to put on the nice face. You couldn't, people walk up to you when you're standing in front of a urinal and ask for your autograph. You can't just tell them F off if you're a baby face, because even though they're just egregiously out of, what are you thinking about?
Right.
I'm sitting here doing one of the most personal things I can do that needs privacy, and you're walking up and asking me to, anyway. But as a heel, it took the fetters off. It took the handcuffs off. You could be whatever you needed to be. And there were, I could always be nice if I wanted to. But if I needed to, if I saw I was approaching a hostile group, I could tell by the way they were looking and standing and maybe the weapons in their hands that I could see a hostile group. Well, I needed to be prepared for that. I needed to be ready to scare the hell out of them before I got within range of them to smack me or stab me or whatever it was. So it gave you a lot. It gave you a lot of freedom. Now I could be as nice as I wanted. Going into Miami, I've talked about it before. Miami was always a great place to work because it's an international city, and you had a wide kind of a variety of fans from all kinds of different backgrounds, including a lot of people of Hispanic ethnicity,
sure,
from all over the Caribbean. So it made for a really eclectic audience. So I could walk into the building, and there would be fans within talking distance. I wasn't walking right through them, but close enough that they behind a cordoned off area where the people would yell out, "Hey, Bob, you're going to get your butt kicked," or whatever. And I could talk to them. I could say, "Oh, yeah, but you're not going to do it," or something like that. And then later that night, in the ring, I'd get them raving at me. But I enjoyed that freedom of being able, if I needed to tell somebody to F off if I needed to, Right. Whereas a baby face, they turned Dick the Bruiser baby face. They turned a Sheik baby face. I mean, the original Sheik.
Sure.
Every bad guy in the planet had been turned babyface, even if it's only for a short period of time.
Yeah.
Because they've got, the heel side has become so overwhelming that the fans are in the area in whatever territory were looking like it was hopeless for the good side, the good to ever triumph over evil. Well, that's when you turn someone like a maniac like Dick the Bruiser or a Buzz Sawyer or somebody like that. You turn them babyface, and all of a sudden you got a really nasty guy who's now fighting for good.
Right. It's a good way to pop the territory for short periods of time, I think. And then obviously those guys that have been heels most of their career, they wind up going back heel because really, fans, what did you expect at the end of the day?
Of course. Yeah.
Bob was so serious about that whole being a role model deal. He'd been on top of the WWF for so long that when Vince Jr. took over and he finally took the belt off Bob and gave it to Hogan, they wanted to keep Backlund around. Story goes they wanted Bob to turn heel. Bob refused, and that was pretty much... Now, he did go on and work a little bit for Vern and things like that after this, but for all intents and purposes, this was pretty much the end of his career by the mid-'80s. And then finally he breaks down and, Vince, I don't know if he came calling to Vince or Vince called him or whatever, but it's, Bob, are you ready to do some work, pal? But Backlund comes back and eventually agrees to turn heel in the mid-'90s and gets him a couple more years, there in the WWF as this crazy, quote-unquote, old guy at the age of his, mid-40s. But he, got the belt, even if it was for a day or two.
Wow.
So, yeah, well, but it's just funny to see Bob turn heel.
Yeah, it is. I need to go back and look and see if I can find. I'd like to watch a match of him working as a heel at that time. So, if there's anything on YouTube?
There's got to be. He was there. It was for a while. He worked on top. He worked with Brett. So yeah, he worked on top there as the heel. Crazy old man. It's funny calling him an old man because I think he was my age at that point in time, but that's the way they sold it anyway.
Well, yeah. Did he have a manager or anything?
No, but at one point he did put his old manager, Arnold Skulland, in the crossface chicken wing for throwing the towel in and making him lose the title to the Iron Sheik 10 years prior. So continuity, I guess, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. You just, shoot 10 years off into the distance somehow and bring people right back up to date.
That's right.
Nice to be in a business where you can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we got other names here on this tour with you, and you've told the story of one George the Animal Steele. You actually told a story about George on the last Japanese tour show that we did. Now, it was in regards to this tour. George wasn't on the last one with you, but you had been tagging with them, if I remember correctly. And it wasn't so much a riot over there where the fans try to attack the wrestlers, but if anybody's ever seen the Stan Hansen videos, the Bruiser Brody videos, they go running into the crowd and they part like this. It's like Moses parting the sea. The fans go fleeing. They're scared to death of these guys.
Yeah.
And George Steele, no different. He kind of causes I don't want to call it a riot. It's like the opposite of a riot. Everybody running away from the animal. But they run right into you, and that's where you talked about getting that injury. They shoved some lady, her cranium, right into your face.
Yeah, George created not a riot, he created a stampede.
There you go.
People away from him, and I happened to be right in their path. And, it was only like maybe a couple dozen, say 20 people. But when they're masked up, and all of them are running as fast as they can because they're convinced George is going to bite the back of their head off, like he does those ring pads when he bites them and pulls out the cotton, spits it out.
Right.
They can vision those teeth embedded in the back of their head. Yeah, they ran right over the top of me and knocked me down. Poor old lady, almost killed her. And the funny thing is, it's so often the case, away from his character, George was probably one of the more rational, down-to-earth guys I was ever around because in his regular life, I think he had it before he retired and went full time as a pro. I think he was a phys ed coach.
Yeah, he was also, I think he had his bachelor in science. Think about that, Michigan State University, George Steele, bachelor of science degree. And you're right, he was absolutely a coach. But think about how educated he was to play the animal character.
Right. Well, yeah, he probably was I don't know, he could have taught, he had a degree. He could have been teaching anything as far as I know, but he would also be a phys ed teacher because coaches in some cases, some schools, especially back in those days, the coaches made very little money for the coaching itself.
Right.
They might make $1,000 for coaching a team for 4 or 5 months during the year, unless you were independently wealthy or whatever, where your income coming from. So I'm sure that, now again, he might have taught something else. I don't know if he what his major was. Bachelor of Science could be math, it could be physics, it could be chemical engineering, all different kinds of things. I had a BA, a Bachelor of Arts, which is more towards literature and that sort of thing. And he was an educated guy. I mean, he didn't run around trotting out big words or anything, but he was very, he was a good conversationalist and quick-witted, and he was fun to be around too. He was had a good sense of humor, and
you kind of segued into George's pro wrestling career by mentioning that indirectly about how they needed supplemental income. Just being a high school coach probably wasn't going to get all the bills paid, at least not year round. And that is exactly why George Steele got into professional wrestling as a supplemental income. He initially started for many years wrestling in the off season of high school football.
Yeah. Well, school's out in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, even if I was still working as a special ed bus attendant, I wouldn't be working now because school's out. And you can work. There's some work in the summer you can get, but usually it's only part-time. So I'm sure to have any income for the summer, he had to do something. And, being a pro wrestler, what a great way to do it. He probably made more money in the summer than he did for the rest of the year, the 9 months that he wasn't
sure when
working.
he was working Bruno in the Garden, he was making a lot more than he was.
Yes.
Well, George, because he got his start, obviously he's from the Detroit, Michigan area, Madison High School, I believe it was called. But because he got his start around the Detroit area as a wrestler, he couldn't be recognized, right, by anybody, the fans, anyone. So when he broke in, he actually wrestled under a mask by the name of the Student. So he was a teacher playing the Student, and he was managed originally by Gary Hart, of all people.
Wow.
There. Yeah, so Gary Hart was his very first manager when he first broke in, and Gary Hart kind of showed him the way, so to speak. And he would go on, and we talked just briefly. He worked, obviously, for those who don't know, the Animal was a big part of the WWF. And then, of course, even Vince Jr. brought him in as kind of a babyface character for the kids to enjoy in the 1980s, a much more lovable Animal. But in the 1970s, what a heel, well, 60s too, but what a heel George Steele was. Just like you said, scared the hell out of the people over there in the All Japan promotion on this tour. It's such a blast, and it's really fun when I go back because I know what I'm watching now. But if you go back, guys, to the Peacock network that has the old WWF stuff from the 70s, you'll see George Steele randomly appear and begin working the TV tapings in June, and by September, he's magically gone back to school. So it's always fun to watch George Steele come in and leave. Oh, he's back to teaching or coaching. So it's always fun when you know. But good stuff there. Do you have any other memories of George Steele over there in Japan with you?
Well, just a couple. A couple road trips. We shared a room. Like if we were away from Tokyo, some other island. A lot of times they would, sometimes just because their place didn't have that many rooms, they would double us up. And I shared rooms with him a couple of times. And, he told me a bit about his personal life and some of the things that had happened to him. And I discovered he was another guy. He was a typical human being.
Right.
Now, his character was wild. At the time, he was doing the Animal act, and it was, he was big. Seriously, bigger than life. That character, and thinking about it, I think about Mr. Wrestler number 2. Mm-hmm. He worked, he was balding or bald on top like George was at an early age in his 20s. He had that male pattern baldness, but so when he was working as a babyface, that look was actually one against him. Because, he looked like an old man because he's bald. So, Johnny Weaver had, not Johnny
Walker?
Walker, had to put on a hood to create the mystique. As George Steele, he didn't put on a hood. When he took it off, now again, I could see why he'd wear a hood especially if he was going to be a babyface.
I think he was, I wouldn't say he was the Animal back in there. I don't really have any footage. It's just everything I've ever heard and the stories I know. They used him as a heel. He basically was always the Animal character in regards to his offense, right? It was just a brute strength kind of wrestler. He wasn't an amateur style. He wasn't a Bob Backlund, we'll say, when he got in the ring. A little ground and pound by George Steele.
Abdullah School?
Well, I don't know if it would go that far. I mean, George Steele knew a few more holds than Abby, but
yeah. Abby knew the chop and the
fork.
Backhanded. Yeah, the fork, the chop. And the backhand, I got a backhand chop and then I got a forehand chop. I got all kinds of chops for you. Well, again, a lot of George's attraction was not done by anything he did. It came from what he was, the character that he was acting out. He could do that gimmick where he bites the turnbuckle and chews a hole in the thing, and then turns around, he's slobbering and looking wild-eyed and crazy like he's looking for somebody to kill. And you could get with the program right away, just seeing that. He didn't have to actually do it to anybody. It was anticipation of what would this guy do. He looked like he'd be glad to bite my nose off, just like he bit that turnbuckle. That was a great way to promote yourself. Mm-hmm. From the time you come out of the dressing room, you turn into this, just what he said, an animal. You turn into this animal that looks very brutish, very animalistic, looking like he's looking for somebody to hurt somehow. It's a great gimmick. And of course, younger in the business, you don't know. You don't know what you can't say, well, why didn't he start out as George the Animal Steele? Well, he didn't know. But again, in person, he was a gentleman, good guy, good heart, decent, honest. So I respected him and I liked him.
I was looking at some of the other names on the tour, and we talked for like 2 minutes offline before we got going because you just wanted me to know, hey, there's a couple guys here that I don't really have a whole lot of stories on in regards to this tour. One of them was Sandy Scott. Now, we recently talked about Sandy, so I don't feel bad because you had some good things, great things to say about Sandy Scott. And I'm sure we'll revisit that in time. And if anything pops into your head while we're doing this show, please feel free. Just, let me know and we'll tell a Sandy Scott story. But we'll continue to move on some of the other names here. Another name you said, I don't really have a whole lot on him, but I gotta address it. Mil Mascaras, the most legendary wrestler to come out of Mexico. Sorry, El Santo fans. But Mil Mascaras is 1971 was his very first tour in the JWA, and now he's here in the All Japan promotion. And I'm sure you didn't really hang out with Mil here or have any cervezas.
No.
But just curious your take on Mil Mascaras, the performer.
Well, you never saw him without his mask off, and I never did in the United States. Mm-hmm. Even in the dressing room, he never. Okay. He'd arrive with his mask on. He'd keep it on. In the dressing room in the States. But over there, we'd be on the bus or train all day. He wouldn't wear the mask on the bus, or I don't remember on a train or not. He might have, but I did see him. A very handsome guy. He was a nice looking man.
Okay.
But he was. I don't want to say aloof, but he kept to himself. I don't ever remember having any kind of conversation with him. And he made it clear. That he kind of wanted to be left alone. And, we talked about, you mentioned El Santo. We talked about his career. Yes. Well, Mascaras was, I think, even bigger star. I know he had the movies also and all kinds of things going for him. So this wrestling tour might have been the very bottom of his income producing things that he did, because there was no special dressing room for him. Like if he was a star in a movie, he'd have his own maybe trailer or something that he could go to between takes.
Right.
And he didn't have it. You weren't treated special on these tours. It didn't matter who you were. I was never on a tour with a world champion there, but I think it would be the same.
Well, they're riding the same bus, the same boat. Yes. I get that, yeah.
Well, because you know what? All those titles and all the hoopla and everything about, this guy's the world champion and all that. It wasn't a guy who went out like Kurt Angle and won a gold medal in the Olympics. This was something that somebody gave, this world champion.
I get you.
They put it on the guy. And there were guys, I don't want to, this isn't a knock, but in a way it is. You had Harley Race as a world champion. Well, Harley, Jerry Funk, and Jack Briscoe as world champions. And those guys, that's fine, because those guys can defend themselves against anybody. Even if they're not great wrestlers, they can fight, and they will fight. And they're tough. But also you had Tommy Rich was an NWA champion. And I'm sorry, Tommy, but I saw Tommy last summer. I'll probably see him again this year. And it's not a knock, But if some guy in the audience, like say Bruiser Brody size and temperament, saw you on the street somewhere and decided he wanted to pick a fight with you, how well are you going to do? You're representing your whole industry as a champion. We would hope you do well. Well, with Harley Race, I don't care who it would be. You had to be, I don't care if you was Andre the Giant. With Harley, you knew no matter whether you beat him or not, you're going to get hurt somehow. He's going to hurt you some way. And that alone is enough to keep some people, especially bullies, to keep them away from you because they don't, they're cowards, really. They don't want to get hurt. But with Tommy Rich, there's nothing there to scare you. He's not big. He's not muscular. He's not like a maniac. Buzz Sawyer wasn't very tall, but Buzz had the temperament of, Wolverine.
Yeah.
And so, he was much muscular and thicker. He does some amateur wrestling, but what you see is not always what you get. And so just because you had a title, a world championship of some kind, you had been this kind of champion, that kind of champion, that has nothing to do. I mean, George Goulas was a champion. It has nothing to do with what you're like in real life. Again, if it's Kurt Angle, Kurt could fight anybody in the world, at least in his prime, and he would do okay because if nothing else, he can run. He's in good enough shape to take off. Well, that's how you win sometimes.
Well,
you make a guy chase you until
that's how
he
you live to
blows
fight
up.
another day. That's for sure. Sometimes you get no one to hold them and no one to fold them.
I got in a fight in high school. Our car did, but we used to go from our little town, East Lansing, down to Lansing, about 3 miles. And we drive up and down the main street at night. We're high school kids on a weekend night. Didn't have anything to do. We usually had a few beers. And one night we got in a fight where our car, and we followed these other guys, we were going to fight somewhere. And they led us right up to a house, and we were stupid enough to stick around. About 4 or 5 guys ran out of the house, and so all of a sudden we got like 7 or 8 guys standing around the car. Well, I got in a fight with one guy, and I was dealing with him. Well, one of my buddies, he had 2 guys wanted to fight him, and he took off, and he made them chase him. And after, 5 minutes or so, I had taken care of the guy I was with. And here comes my buddy back, and he's not touched. Doesn't have any injuries or wounds or anything. I looked back, and the 2 guys that had chased him are slowly limping and hobbling back. And what he did was he chased him, and he was looking over his shoulder. He had him chase him. When one guy got ahead of the other one, he let that guy catch him, and he pounded on him until the other guy got there. And what he did that several times until he managed to smack both. He had to fight him one at a time for a few seconds that he hurt him bad enough that they didn't want to fight anymore. So he took on 2 guys and he beat them. So running, people say, oh, you're a coward if you run. No. Some of the greatest battles were won by people making a retreat and getting the enemy to chase them into a position where the person who supposedly looks like they're running away, they're in a much more better position to fight. A lot of times the retreat leads right into an ambush, which overwhelms the people who are chasing them. It's a tactic. Now, if you run and keep running the rest of your life, maybe it is cowardice. But, yeah, I forgot where I started on this one.
Well, I was trying to talk about Mil Mascaras. I don't know where we were, how we wound up there. But yeah, I thought, and just going back to Mil for just a brief second here, Bob, if you're all right over there.
I was laughing so hard.
So I thought in general, Mil Mascaras, certainly he had the look. I see why he was a quote unquote movie star. I guess he wasn't. I can't really put quotes around that, can I? He was a movie star, and he was, used very well on the West Coast here. He was huge in the Eddie Einhorn when he tried to go national and do the IWA. He gave him the belt up here in the Cleveland area even. And he was well known. And of course, he went over to New York City, worked Madison Square Garden. I believe he was the first wrestler that the New York State Athletic Commission allowed wear a mask. I'm sure some people don't realize that prior to Mil coming in there, if you were a masked wrestler, you weren't permitted to wear the mask when you worked the Garden. And I'm sure money talked. And obviously, Mil got to wear the mask. But so just another legendary figure in the history of wrestling, international star. Japan, United States, Mexico, beyond. And just kind of cool to see yet another huge name here on this tour alongside you.
Well, we talked about another Hispanic star was Del Santo.
Mm-hmm.
Del Santo was about 5'8" or 5'9". Mascaras was at least 6 feet, if not taller, at least 6 feet, maybe 5'11", and he was big. El Santo probably weighed 180, 190 pounds at the most, and Mascaras probably weighed 220. And again, big, broad-shouldered, big arms, and a nice body, slim waist, big, wide shoulders. So he was above average size for a Hispanic male. That's something you can't. He's got the look, and he's got the size too. So that opened doors. It's just like somebody else we're going to be talking about here is Danny Hodge. Danny weighed like 220. I never saw him getting bigger than that. So he was kind of limited in terms of having the kind of size. Now, again, because it's a work, it's a manipulation, you can go out there against Andre the Giant. If Andre is willing to lay down for you, you can beat the crap out of him. But in terms of what appears, in terms of, and what you see is what you get, not in this case. Danny didn't have the size to become, I think, the heavyweight champion, because I can't imagine why they wouldn't make him the NWA champion. He was always limited to being the junior champion, the lightweight champion,
right?
Which he was for many, many years. Yeah, Mascaras had that size that gave him an advantage over a lot of the guys that his competitors were. Nobody was that big.
Yeah, most of the luchadors, most of the guys coming out of Mexico were nowhere near the girth, the size, the thickness of Emil Mascaras, the body, who knows, maybe he was on some of that Billy Graham protein powder at some point. I have no idea. Just speculation, guys. But you talk about a unique body size, a body type for Mexico, a guy the size of Mil Mascaras. We were talking off air about a guy who defied the typical body size of a Japanese wrestling star. Of course, Giant Baba sticks out right off the bat, but also Jumbo Tsuruta.
Yeah, he was, I think the average height for a Japanese male might have been 5'8", like on a national scale. And he was over 6 feet, 6'1", 2, 3, or somewhere in there. He had size, and that was something that was unique in Japan. Think about the sumo wrestling and what was so appealing to a lot of the fans. And sumo was by far many times more popular than amateur pro wrestling over there. They could charge $50 for a ringside seat, and you could get at least 2 people in one of those seats, sometimes 3. So you could sell one seat for $100 or $150,
mm-hmm.
And they would sell out their stadiums over there for the sumo fights or matches.
Yeah.
And those went on sometimes for 2 or 3 weeks every day. So, but they were all big guys. They were all 3 times the size of a typical Japanese male. But I think one of the big attractions, again, was their size. You never saw sumo with guys that weighed 120 pounds. Everybody was big. Not everybody was a great big, I don't want to say fat, but they were carrying an extra. There was a couple guys that had at least 100, 150 pounds of blubber hanging off them, but they had the muscular underneath it to carry it, and they used that weight effectively. And those fights never took, their bouts never took more than 10 seconds. Was like going an hour Broadway in amateur wrestling or pro wrestling to go 10 seconds. The sumo's on, I get it on my TV up here in Michigan, and I watched a little bit of it to see if I recognized anybody, or sometimes they play past matches. But, the typical match doesn't last more than 4 or 5 seconds. But the build-up takes an hour or half hour sometimes. And
it's all in the show, huh?
Yeah. So, back to Tsuruta and Baba. And you had these guys that were just, I don't want to say freaks, but they were unusual because of their size. And they're just, there's the fact that they're from the Oriental world going against these non-Orientals, the Americans and Canadians and Europeans, whoever it is, but non-Orientals that come in to go against them. It creates someone you can cheer for. There are home guys, even if they're not Japanese or Korean. They're somebody from our corner of the world that we can get behind against these Americans. I'm not sure how much heat there was left in Japan after World War II. By the time we were up there, it had been 30 years or 25 years. But there were people who still remembered. Yeah, Tsuruta did well. We talked about why maybe he didn't. He did work in this country. He told me for Vern.
Yeah.
Do you know how long he stayed?
Well, he had worked off and on prior to that in the States. Anybody who was ever going to become something special, or they had eyes on grooming for a top level talent in Japan, they always sent him over here first to kind of learn the ways of the world, the Western way of professional wrestling. And he worked here. I believe he worked for the Funks, if I'm not mistaken, very early in his career as a Tommy Tsuruta down there.
Oh, yeah.
In Amarillo. But he'd wind up back in the mid 80s. Vern Gagne gave him the AWA world title. So
wow.
Yeah, he'll be in and out, but obviously he made most of his living over there in Japan, the top level star. He was Baba's protege, basically. He was the top level guy. Unfortunately he passed away very young in the early 90s, but at this point in time, Jumbo is just getting started. I mean, in 1972, he was part of the Greco-Roman team for Japan in the Olympics. So he's still fresh to the pro wrestling world as well.
Well, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I might have seen him wrestle because I was there to watch the.
That's right. You were in Munich.
Yeah, I was in Munich watching the games. Well, I didn't even know that. Well, good for him.
Yeah, so he's still fairly. I guess you could call him a rookie. He broke in '73, much like Bob Backlund. So Jumbo's still learning, but he's in the main events here, teaming a lot with Baba, and he's learning. And you had the luxury of having some really great partners here, like a George Steele, like.
Right.
Bob Backlund, he's a rookie, but it's good to have him on your side. He knows what he's doing in there. And you guys are working a lot with Baba and Jumbo. So Jumbo's getting to learn from not just some of the Gaijin talent coming in, but also here, he's getting to team with a lot of the upper level talent like the Destroyer and like Baba on the other side of the ring. So Jumbo immediately being groomed for that big push right out of the gate here in Japan. Yep. And like you said, it's very unique. 6'3", he was a big boy.
Yes, he was, and he was thick. He was solid. He wasn't like a string bean or anything.
And much like yourself, an Olympian. So he had the credibility, as a wrestler. And that would mean a lot over there. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, it should anywhere, but especially over there because they had many world champions in the lightweights. 115, 125, 133. I don't know if they ever had an Olympic champion at any of the upper weights. So anybody that just made the Olympic team was going to be someone famous, or someone who could mean something for the rest of their life. They're 90 years old, and they're still, an Olympian. Because the Olympic thing is never former, never past. Once an Olympian, always an Olympian. So you don't say, well, I used to be an Olympian. You are an Olympian if you are on an Olympic team. I used to be an Olympian. I love it.
Yeah. So, I got demoted.
Oh, man. Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories, whether it's Jamie Ward with Georgia 81, Roman Gomez with the UWF in 1986, or Gene Jackson covering Memphis in 85. 3 projects going on right now over there at Regional Wrestling. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. Bob goes back in time each and every week, covering not just his career, but countless stories and interactions with hundreds of wrestling names spanning his 2 decades in the business. But that's not all. You can also check out the Puro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Puro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Pocket Cast, and beyond. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And of course, now would be a fantastic time to become a WrestleCopia patron. I'm talking about that $5 all access tier over at patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, patreon.com/WrestleCopia, where you get so many gifts for just $5, including all of my insanely detailed show notes for every episode of The Grenade Show, Regional Wrestling, and the Monday Warfare podcast. You'll also get early access to a lot of the podcasts here on the WrestleCopia brand, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. We also offer remastered versions of the earliest episodes of The Grenade Show, covering the 1989 NWA project. Includes enhanced sound quality, plus new content and conversation never heard before. But that's still not all, guys. You also get at least a dozen digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure each and every month, plus random bonus video drops, and of course, the Patreon exclusive Watch Along series, covering many past WWF and WCW events. And if that's not all, videocasts, also now a part of Patreon. And for those who like all of their podcasts in one nice, neat little pile, the WrestleCopia Patreon also offers a Patreon exclusive Spotify account. You can actually go over to your Spotify with your WrestleCopia Patreon credentials. Instead of listening or downloading directly from Patreon, you can go over to Spotify, listen to all the latest shows, including all of the early releases. And you get all of that and so much more for just $5. No subscription, cancel anytime. Give it a try for a month, guys. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into paying the bills. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia. Help me pay some of the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come.
Only thing I remember from a match was Baba potatoed the hell out of me one time.
I watched that. I'll let you tell the story, but I just want to get this in. I just watched that tag team match you were talking about with you and Bob Backlund versus Baba and Jumbo. And they give Jumbo the win over Backlund. He pins Backlund. And this is the final night of the tour, mind you. And you run in like the heel to make the save. You got to make the save for your partner. And you run right into a Baba chop, and it's so loud. It echoes into the TV screen. Right at the end of the match, the final fall, 1, 2, 3, and he just goes whack, and you can hear it. I popped as the video ended. So, but yeah, we'll get back to your story. But I just thought that was funny. It's like one final chop for Bob Roop at the end of the tour.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that. You know, I'm sure Bob enjoyed that. I had it happen with Ron Fuller too. Somehow the tall guys and the hand-eye coordination, their hand is about a foot further from their eye than mine is, for example. Mm-hmm. So the message has the brain message down to the hand has got a little bit further to travel. And if that many seconds that it takes to get there, well, Baba chopped me. The first chop, he hit me in the throat and knocked me back on the ropes. And when I came off, he hit me right in the forehead. And I'm not goofy, but I mean, they pretty good, pretty solid chop. That one didn't make any smacking sound. It made a thud. what are you going to say? I sold it. I mean, actually, it's interesting if someone's chopping you, they always chop you right in the throat. Why wouldn't a guy chop you in the face or the side of the head or on the kneecap if he's down on the mat? If the chop works, it shouldn't matter where they hit you. But I never minded that stuff. Nobody was trying to hurt me. I potatoed a few people myself, so that just was part of the wrestling business. But yeah, the Bob Backlund was good, and we're talking about that match, Bob and myself against Jumbo and Gianto Baba. Yeah, the match was good. You wouldn't know that two of the guys in there were like fairly great.
Right. Yeah.
It looked good.
I didn't put that into context until I started watching the match. That's when I said, man, I know Bob's got to be pretty young here to the business. And then I realized, you know what? Jumbo should be too. And I go and I look and I see, wow, yeah, they just both started within the last year. So to see them both out here in basically what was the main event of the final night of the tour, it was very interesting. Yeah.
And I, again, looking at it, I think that looking at that match, I'm pleased at how well it went with the lack of experience from a couple of the guys. Now, I wasn't that experienced myself. Yeah, those guys were, it was always fun to work with them. Well, the Japanese people were excited. You couldn't tell, but that buzz of anticipation was there for every match. The reason they were there, they were interested. They wanted to see it. It wasn't just the main event. But in this series of matches, every match could be like a main event.
Right.
Because you kept switching the guy, the opponents around.
Right. So if this guy was main eventing last night, he might be in the second match the following night. But if he was considered a main eventer the night before, wouldn't that make most of the card main events?
Yes.
So lots of quality matches, obviously. That's the way Japan worked, though. Lots of quality matches. Honestly, even the what we would call the curtain jerkers over here in the States, lots of quality talent over here in Japan. They didn't fool around with the no-level talent. So good stuff from beginning to end. And I look at, it's like a who's who of stalwarts from Japan here for the 1970s in regards to the undercard, talking about Japanese talent. And I'm just going to mention a few names here for the fans out there, the listeners to who may know some of these names, just so they get an idea of some of the other guys on these cards with you. These guys like Thunder Sugiyama, Samson Katsuwada, Rocky Hata, Atsushi Onita. Yes, guys, that Onita. He was a top-level junior heavyweight until he tore out his knee, and he really could never go at that same level. And then he eventually creates the FMW promotion in Japan. Bob, maybe you've seen those exploding ring matches or the barbed wire and things. That was a lot thanks to Onita, who basically created that hardcore style promotion over there in Japan. He was on this tour as a young junior at this point in time, but I see a lot of Japanese talent that would wind up in the States for lengthy periods of time. Takachiyo, the future Kabuki, we've talked about him, the man with the green mist. Masafuchi, Masayo Ito, Mari Suzuki, but I also see a guy who would go on to become Kendo Nagasaki. And I do believe you wound up booking for Kendo later on in the Florida territory, but do you have any memories at all of Kendo Nagasaki?
Yeah, basically not in Japan, but basically in Florida. When I was booking down there in the mid 80s, my last booking job, Kendo and Ray Candy as Kareem Muhammad were a tag team, and they were good. I was reflecting on the fact that you had a black wrestler and a Oriental wrestler, that their gimmick as tag team, they were dressed in the camouflage, the military type stuff, that they had this philosophy of being, I don't know, terrorists or soldiers of fortune or whatever.
Sure.
It superseded their race.
Mercenaries, maybe.
Yeah, it overcame it. Kareem didn't get the heat because he was black, and Kendo didn't get the heat because he was Oriental. That might have been part of it, but that wasn't the majority of it. The majority of it was the identities they had assumed, which was smart on their part, because you could work in the South without having to worry about getting killed just because of your race. But they were good. They drew money. I booked them in a few main events where there may be a double main event match. They would be one of them, depending on who they were going against.
Right.
And Kendo, I have one particular story I enjoy telling. We had a wrestler named Tyree Pride. He was from the Caribbean,
Yeah.
and he spoke a patois of French, Portuguese, English that was fairly common, I guess, throughout the Caribbean. So he was a big star in the Bahamas. He would have been anywhere in the Caribbean. The TV went, but in the Caribbean, in the Bahamas, and South Florida. Now, just South Florida. I'm talking about Miami, a little bit in Fort Lauderdale, but more in Miami, where there was a lot of people from the Caribbean living in, people from all the Caribbean islands living in Miami. And of course, in the Bahamas, not just racial, but ethnic too, he had a lot of followers. So he was a big star there. But it didn't transpose. It did. If you booked him in Tampa, he wouldn't mean anything.
Right.
Or very, very little.
Yeah.
He wasn't going to draw a lot of people from the Caribbean. I mean, he might draw some. I still get heat with a couple of buddies of mine. I booked Tyree with Ric Flair, the Miami building, because that particular week in the convention center, the main hall was taken for something. So we were relegated to a side building. It only held about 4,000 people.
Okay.
And so I booked Tyree with Ric Flair in a title match. I still get people saying, "How could you book, Tyree Pride?"
Mm-hmm.
Well, it drew. I mean, I don't think we sold out, but about 3/4 of the people who were there were supporting Tyree, so it was effective. But the problem was with this Tyree being like a main event, really over, like the Dusty Rhodes of the Bahamas, to some extent, and in Miami, that it gave him a big head. And
okay.
Yeah, and so I had him booked for some reason. I don't remember why, but I had him booked at some town in mid Florida, say Ocala, in a spot show. Tyree was used to having matches where he was like, again, the Dusty Rhodes in the match in the Bahamas, and the heels was because the people out there in the Bahamas were dangerous, and in Puerto Rico were dangerous. So you had to, you wanted to get the babyface over. You didn't want to get a ton of heat because you didn't need to, and then you put him over and get beat by him, and that way you could get out of there alive. Well, Tyree was used to that mystique, that stature he had in Miami, and he took it with him to the show in, say, near Ocala, a small spot show, and he expected the match to be the same way, that Kendo Nagasaki was going to go out there and throw him and do something, throw him out, and he'd hit him with a drop kick. And in other words, he was just going to go out there and work just like they did in the Bahamas, where you made the guy look like $1 million,
right?
And then you got a little bit of heat on him, and then they beat you. Well, Kendo wasn't having any of it. He did one thing when Tyree went to do a drop kick. Kendo stepped back, and he missed the drop kick. He landed on his back of his shoulders. Kendo got on top of him and rode him for about 8 minutes.
Wow!
Talk about a horrible match, but nobody was hissing and booing and whatever. Kendo kept it interesting enough but he didn't let him do any of his crap.
Right.
Not crap, but
I know what you're saying.
Yeah, there was no need to, and frankly, Kendo was a veteran.
Oh, yeah.
Tyree didn't have the experience.
Most of his wrestling, not that he wasn't wrestling in the Florida territory as well from time to time, but most of his experience was wrestling in the Bahamas, in that area. He was the Haitian sensation, Tyree Pride.
Yes.
And, much like Carlos Colon in Puerto Rico, not saying Carlos couldn't work, these guys were, as you said, Dusty Rhodes of their area. And so in this instance, Tyree Pride has to work a certain way in the Bahamas, and that's the way he's used to. So while he may be a professional wrestler, he may know how to take the bumps, he may know how to sell, he may know how to do a drop kick, but at the same time, he learned a different world of pro wrestling than somebody here in the States, because it doesn't work the same there, because you don't want the heat that you want here in the States, because it's not a joke there. You can very well get stoned. So
yes.
So he's not used to playing the beaten puppy on the ground or whatever there.
No. Well, the thing is, he didn't have the experience even to pick up on it. If you got any kind of antenna up or any sensitivity at all, you're going to be looking at the guy you're getting ready to work with. When the referee brings you out there in the center of the ring, they still did that in those days, where they check your fingers for
Yeah.
your fingernails and all that. You're looking at the guy across from you and trying to pick up on what kind of vibes he's giving off. And 99 times out of 100, all you need is a glance, and you could tell from a guy's body language or the way he's looking at you or what you feel. If you feel like an overwhelming anger and fury and rage, and you're not mad, well, you better be looking at the referee and your opponent, because somebody in there is. If it's your opponent, you want to find out why before you ever even tie up with him, because you don't want him to take it out on you. But Tyree didn't have that ability, and he didn't pick up anything with Kendo at all. Before I'd ever had to do a drop kick on, if I'd have been a babyface that did drop kicks, before I ever did anything like that, I kind of checked with my opponent to see if he's okay with it. And the thing is, Kendo didn't call for a drop kick, so that's why he stepped back. But
the reason you say that is a lot of people may not know this. Back in the day, the heels called the majority of the matches. Maybe not a rookie heel, but in general, most of the heels would dictate how the match would go.
Right, exactly. And, being that you were the one that was going to pay the penalty for whatever, if you made a mistake and went too far and got people too mad, like you talked about in Korea, where the chairs start flying in the ring.
Right.
It's risky business. And the thing is, it's not just you that gets hurt, or is that the potential to get hurt. The fans get hurt. People in the audience get hurt. Old people get hurt. Children get hurt. And it hurts the box office, it hurts the building. And, the thing, it hurts everything about what you're trying to create out there is entertainment, sports entertainment. Well, entertainment shouldn't involve a trip to the hospital. So anytime you do stuff like that and you go too far, it's a serious professional abomination. Why did you do that? You took every bit. We got a full house here, and you went out there and had a riot, and you think that's great. Well, it's the worst thing you could have done. And I would fire guys if they I never had to.
Luckily, the fans in Japan are much more subdued. Now, they will run away, as you said, a stampede away from specific wrestlers, but they don't necessarily, you don't see a lot of riots going on with the Japanese fans. Boy, we still got a couple of names here to hit on, Bob, so if it's okay, we'll keep rolling unless you have anything else on Kendo.
No, that's basically it. He was quiet.
Basically, Tyree Pride screwed around and found out. That's what happened there.
Yeah. So. Tyree should have checked with Kendo to see what Kendo had got in a headlock or something, and let Kendo tell him what to do.
Gotcha.
To go out there and just think that Kendo was going to do whatever he wanted was a bad mistake. Because Tyree had the way he acted in the Bahamas and in Miami in the dressing room, he acted like he was Dusty Rhodes. It was. I was kind of glad to see him get
put in his
reminder.
place.
Well, it's a work.
Yeah.
I
gotcha.
Tyree, you're not tough. You can't beat Bruiser Bodie by yourself. The only way you win in these matches is because we let you win. Maybe you could beat somebody, but I don't know if you have any wrestling ability at all. But I know that 115-pounders on a wrestling team could beat you if you don't have any wrestling. They'll take you down. You'll never get up. Yeah, but that was Kendo. And so who are we going to move to now?
Well, you just mentioned wrestling teams. Let's talk about a guy out of Syracuse. I'm talking about the Destroyer, Dick Beyer. And what a legendary figure in all of professional wrestling, but especially in Japan. Yeah, I think his first tour there was back in 1963, but even before that, he was working guys like Kokichi Endo and Ricky Dozan, the godfather of Japanese wrestling. So the Destroyer had been around the Japanese wrestlers forever, and he dons the mask there eventually, I believe in the early 60s, and Dick Beyer becomes the Destroyer, the intelligent, sensational Destroyer, or he was the Destroyer, guys, and he becomes synonymous with Japanese wrestling moving forward.
Yeah, he stayed over there, for years. I think he would, I don't know if you would know his background better than me. Did he stay in Japan for like a year at a time?
I do know there was about an 8-year span there where he mostly worked only Japan, and that's basically from around 63 to 71. That was for the JWA. Now, eventually, obviously, the JWA going to go, and then he picks up here with the All Japan promotion, working for the Giant Baba right after. So he spends most of his career over in Japan from, I believe, around 63 forward. Now, I'm not saying he didn't go back and work the States and things. Everybody knows that he did. I believe he even gets a very brief cup of coffee as the AWA World Champion for Vern, though he doesn't wrestle there as the Destroyer, oddly enough. I think he was Dr. X.
I know that when we were there on this particular tour, he had his own TV show on that same channel that covered the wrestling. He had like a variety show. Yeah, he'd be out there. He was a host, and I don't think he spoke Japanese. Maybe he had an interpreter. I don't remember. Yeah, he had this he was an hour long, or maybe half hour, but however, whatever, it didn't matter. He had his own show. That's how big he was. I didn't get a chance to ever. I worked with him in Japan and had some good matches with him, but I never got to talk to him like in a dressing room. We never shared dressing rooms. Mm-hmm. But years later, at the Gulf Coast reunion in Mobile, he was coming down there, and I had a chance to get to know him a little bit and talk to him. And he was college graduate and amateur wrestler, so we had some things in common that gave us a basis to compare notes. And he was a good guy. I respected him. Oh, I mean, his career was much more distinguished than mine, but he was a good guy. He had a lot of things going for him. Even being kind of a legend while he was still working, he had created this kind of status all those years in Japan. That he was down to earth. He wasn't an egomaniac or any kind of guy that was talking down to you or anything. So he understood. All his stature and everything was created. And it was a tribute to his personal ability and appeal that he was able to take advantage of it. Some people say the good luck is when preparation meets opportunity. Well, he was certainly prepared, and he got the opportunity over there. I'm happy for him. He was a credit to me. He was a credit to the business because he was legitimate. He could wrestle, and I don't know if he ever had any shoots over there or in this country, but if he did, I'm sure he handled himself, with distinction.
No, yeah, I was just scrolling through some of the stuff he did here because I was curious after you mentioned he had been on TV over there. I see he was part of a musical comedy show also over there on TV in Japan. So he did a lot of fun stuff over there. And he also apparently, I didn't realize this, he helped actually promote some of the early All Japan stuff with Giant Baba. So I'm not sure if he was helping Baba or if he was learning with Baba in regards to how to promote, but I knew he was higher up and he could throw his ideas out there, and he probably brought some of the Gaijin talent in to work for some of these tours. And it's just kind of interesting to see what a career he had, an American. Now, Stan Hansen would do it later. Stan could do it anywhere. But to see him basically live a lot of his career in Japan and become such a huge household name in another country, it's just amazing at the level of talent he was. And you say you didn't really share a locker room with him because all the Gaijin worked opposition to Baba here on the tour, but the Destroyer, he was so welcomed by the Japanese fans that by this point he was teaming with the Giant Baba on the opposite side of the ring from you.
Yes, and that was very unusual. I didn't remember seeing any other non-Oriental being accepted as part of the babyface side that went against the foreigners coming in. So that was real impressive that he had done that well for himself. I was impressed, and again, the guy turned out to be a good man. Later on at the twilight of his career, he wasn't walking around with a big big ego on his shoulders. He was down to earth and good guy. He had a lot of good stories. Yeah, he did good.
Yeah, and obviously he went back and forth. Like I said, he worked some for Vern for several years there as well. So he wasn't always in Japan. Yeah, he spent his entire life basically around amateur and professional wrestling. He passed away, it had to be about 5 years ago now, but he lived a long, successful life from that standpoint. Yeah, he had a good career. But Dick Beyer was a hell of a man, and he was in a movie that I watched. It was kind of a quote-unquote documentary, but not really. It was a mockumentary of a professional wrestling story back in 1985, and he was a wrestler without the mask. He was just Dick Beyer. And he was so believable in this movie and just this throwaway match teaming with Dick Murdoch. And I said, These guys should have been a team for 10 years because it was an amazing little bit of stuff from the movie. But Dick Murdoch and Dick Beyer could have been a hell of a tag team. I'll tell you that just from what I saw of that movie called Grunt, the wrestling movie, guys, for anybody curious out there. So Dick Beyer did a little bit of everything.
Well, I'm going to see if I can find that. I'd like to see it myself. Yeah, I think he was a success story because, like I say, later on in life, at the twilight of his life, he was a success story. You know, he wasn't out in the public by himself with nobody to talk to, and they again having these reunions like the Gulf Coast thing was a big help for retired wrestlers, where guys could get together and tell their stories to each other, and there'd always be some fans. There were some fans available, not so much at the Gulf Coast. It was mostly family, but people would bring their wife and kids. Usually the bigger, older kids, and you would have some like non-wrestling people that didn't actually get in the ring would be there. That you could you'd have a new audience for your stuff. But and then also you saw guys, you ran into guys that you didn't know very well, that you would find out that you liked. Anyway, you run into people that at these things where you're all of a sudden your stories have some relevance because you have some people that haven't heard them. Yeah, it was always good. I was always glad to see guys come to those that had a successful transition from the business into their own personal life, their retirement and whatever, so that afterwards, it wasn't just all negative stuff.
Oh, very good. We've got one more Gaijin talent left here on this tour. Save the best for last, or at least maybe the most stories in regards to Danny Hodge, who had, I think his first Japanese tour goes back to 1967, and this will unfortunately mark his final tour of Japan because, as we know, not too far off in the future, Danny going to suffer that car accident that really ends his wrestling career, at least full-time. And so right. Danny Hodge going to break his neck. I think we've told the story here on the show before where his car flips off the side of the road upside down into the water. Danny punches out the glass, realizes his neck is broken, and with one hand holds his head up while he uses the other hand to swim to shore. What a man. And, that's just one story in regards to Danny Hodge, but I guess you have a few here, at least something interesting in regards to Danny Hodge on this Japan tour.
Well, I have one that's a segue to one that's medical. I worked with him in the Bayfront. For the finish, he was going to miss a drop kick, and I was going to, I don't know if I picked him up, gave him the shoulder breaker, but anyway, I beat him. Well, that was on a Saturday night. Monday, I was talking to Charlie Lay down at the office for some reason, and he said, "Did you know that Danny was in the hospital?" And I said, "No, what happened?" He said, "Well, your match the other night, when he drop kicked you, he threw his back out, and he couldn't walk, so he's in the hospital." Oh. And I thought, I was so amazed because he did get up to finish the match, or I was able to get him up and give him the shoulder breaker. And I don't remember them carrying him out of there. You're talking about, and the only reason I tell a story, you're talking about a tough guy. Yeah, in Japan, it's my first time of being like in close. I'd never ridden in a car with him, for example. I'd been on a cart or two with him, but I knew him. But because, we were both Olympians, and Danny was super, you talk about competitive. He was competitive to, pathology. He was just psycho about it. He would sit at the back of the bus. One time we got off and there was, say, 100-yard stairs that led upwards to this place up at the top, where we were going to all go up there and see a museum or something. Danny got off the bus last because he'd been sitting at the back. By the time he got off, the first people who had started up the stairs were halfway up. Mm-hmm. Well, by the time the guy who got to the top of the stairs first was Danny. He was up there waiting on everybody when the rest of us got there. Well, he was so competitive. He and I had a workout one day. We had a day that we had off. We could go to the gym and work out in the afternoon. And he and I he wanted to shoot. He wanted to see if go takedowns. And what can I say? I didn't want to, but I said okay. And so within just 3 or 4 minutes, he had a takedown that he could take down anybody. He could take down Andre. A single leg takedown where he could just get one leg and kind of pull out to the side and then be standing back up where he'd have hold of your leg. Well, anyway, he took me down, and that was fine. I said, way to go, thank you. And that way I didn't want to do any more than that. Well, I got on a treadmill. I jogged for, 10 minutes or whatever. And as soon as I got off the treadmill, he got on it, and he didn't jog. He started sprinting.
Wow.
And, sprinting on his treadmill. And he was barefoot. So I didn't keep track of time. I think it was 15, 20 minutes. He finally stops, and he comes over to me. I don't know what I'm doing. Maybe pretending to work out bench pressing, but taking a nap. I don't know. But he came over to me, and he said, I was going to run for a half hour, but he said, I got blistered. He showed me his feet. He had big blisters on his feet.
Oh, my God.
From that treadmill. Yeah, he was nuts. Well, there was one thing that being competitive, if you're competitive at everything, there's got to be somewhere that you have a weakness. That you're vulnerable.
Right.
If you have to win everything in order to feel okay about yourself, you got a problem, because there's going to be things that you're going to go against people that, are just you can't beat. And we were playing cribbage, a card game called cribbage.
Right.
I could beat him. We would play 7 games. We played best 4 out of 7, and I could beat him. And one time we were playing, and I won the 4th game out of 7, so that whole series is over. They've already asked, it's time for him to wrestle. They've already asked him. They said, Danny, Mr. Hodge, you're up. And so...
Not until I win this game.
Exactly. He asked me, he said, good deal. I said, no. Go on. You're supposed to wrestle, Danny. Go on. Yeah.
Wow.
He wanted to play. He couldn't stand. He couldn't stand even having to leave while he would got beaten at something. So
tell Bob to put another match on. But you're the main event tonight, Danny. There are no other matches. I could see him just wiping the cards off the table. All right, that's it, and just puts his arm up. Let's arm wrestle.
No. He had to beat you at whatever it was.
I got you.
He had to beat you.
Super competitive, Danny Hodge.
Oh yeah, just I found out later that he came to the Scott Teal's. We would get together down there in Tennessee every year.
Yeah,
I got to talk to him, or at least listen to him a couple times about his childhood and his background. He had a really, really unfortunate childhood where he was almost like an orphan. And at 4 or 5 years old, he was somehow sleeping in a back room at the firehouse in a little town he lived in. He didn't really have a home. So he was really insecure. I have a brother who's the same way. And what happens is that you never get over it. If you're born that way, or it happens up to you early in life, no matter what you accomplish. Now, here's a guy that was 3-time national champion, which was all, he could only compete 3 times. The most valuable wrestling award at the NCAA tournament to this day is the Danny Hodge Award.
Right. So it's got the award named after him.
Yes, for the most valuable wrestler. So, yeah, he's got real stature there. But you know what? In spite of all that, it didn't make him any more competent as an adult. It constantly showed up. I did some interviews with him where he would kind of fudge the accomplishments of, well, I'll give you an example. When I told earlier about Ole Anderson, when he broke in, there were a bunch of guys up in Gagne's area, and Hodge was one of them. Crusher and some other guys there. Mm-hmm. And they asked Ole, who do you want to work out? And he picked, because Hodge was the smallest, he picked him, which was by far the worst guy he could have picked. But anyway, Hodge was talking about years later, we're down at Scott Teal's down there in Tennessee. We're doing an interview together with one of the boys. I don't remember who it was, but it was a video interview for his little show, wherever he's from. And Danny was talking about working out with Ole. And he said, yeah, I worked out with Ole Anderson when he first started. And he totally made something up. He said, yeah, he was an Olympic weightlifter, which is not true. So I think, well, why would he come up with that? Because he had to make Ole seem like more than what he was. That was that insecurity I'm talking about. And no matter how well you do, it's just never enough. I mean, the guy was a great amateur wrestler and a top pro, too. But
he was driven. It sounds like he was driven at the very least.
He was, and he couldn't stand to be, if he thought in any way, shape, or form he was being disrespected. I told you the one about everybody, the one about Sputnik, him and Sputnik.
Yeah.
Where
Sputnik was strutting over top of him.
Yeah, he hit him with the brass knucks, and he was strutting, and he got too close. And Danny was watching him out of the corner of one eye. He was watching him strut, and he felt like he was strutting and making him look bad.
Right.
So he reached out and grabbed his ankle with one of those claws he had, those iron claws.
That would smash apples.
Yeah, when they talked to the Iron Claw, when they had put that movie on, I thought they were talking about Hodge.
Hell.
Yeah, he grabbed the ankle, Sputnik immediately. I quit, I give up, stop, help. And there's some great stories I heard over the years of guys who ribbed him, who pulled ribs on him because it was dangerous.
I was going to say, why would you do that? I mean, this is like jumping into the ring with a bull, which I've done. So believe me, I know how stupid that is.
Well, they did it because he was so ribbable. He would get hot. You get the guys come up with their best stories. And there was a guy, I don't remember his name. Now I sound like I have lost my memory, but he told a story about somehow in Japan locking Danny out of his own room by being able to go having an adjoining room with a door. And Danny, they lured Danny out in the hallway with just a towel around his waist. Somebody was supposed to sign an autograph or something. And while he was out there, they shut and locked his hotel room door. He had to get somebody up there to open the door for him. Well, he came looking. He assumed that he left the door open. He assumed that somebody in the adjoining room or whatever. So he went looking for him. This one guy that did it was hiding in the closet. And he said, Danny was looking around. He said he just prayed. He prayed as he looked in that closet. Yeah. Well, what are you doing in the closet? Oh, I'm just taking a nap, I'm not the one that locked you out. But when the guy's telling the story, what's funny about it is he gives this impression of being really in dread that if he got caught, Danny wasn't going to beat the crap out of him or anything. But you never know. The guy might say, that's pretty funny. Let's shake on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Here, let me pat you on the back for that one and grab the guy up there next to his neck and hit that trap muscle, make him feel like you're pulling it right off your body.
Yeah, give me your hand. Let me help you out of that closet.
Yeah. So that was, and you know what? Danny was a character for different reasons. He wasn't really trying to be, just by being himself.
Yeah.
And having the kind of background he had, it created a real potpourri in terms of like character traits that, you didn't always understand where he was coming from if you didn't know anything about it. But he was, he was a great amateur and he was a very, very good pro. But to my knowledge, he never really abused anybody or, was terrible to anybody. So I'm honored in the fact that I got to be a colleague with the guy and, be on a tour with him and everything. He was a better amateur wrestler than I was. I think because I had the ability to be a heel for most of my career. I think that I'm not saying I was better talent, but I think I was a more developed, more filled out character. By being able to be a heel, you don't stay the same. Some guys do. I never stayed the same kind of heel. I would vary my approach in the same towns. I wouldn't be the same guy every week I came out there. I'd be different. I'd be Bob Roop, but I wouldn't come out there with an ogre, the club over my shoulder. I'd come out sometimes pretending to be a babyface. Anyway, by having that heel experience, I felt like I had more wide-ranging experience than the guys who didn't have that.
Right.
I'm going to tell a compliment that I want, because I want to thank the guy publicly. When Jerry Briscoe, Steve Kern, Brian Blair, and Kevin Sullivan and I did a roundtable for that Vice TV.
Yeah.
We did a roundtable.
Tales from the Territories.
Yeah, for Championship Wrestling from Florida.
Right.
During one of the breaks, one of the crew there, guys, good people with Vice all around. I worked for them a couple of times, and good people around all the way. One of the guys that were helping us get this produced, he asked, which one of you guys was the best worker? And I wasn't going to say anything. I didn't think I wouldn't have never said myself, of course. But I was surprised. Jerry Briscoe actually I said, well, Bob Roop. Steve Kerr and Kevin Sullivan weren't real thrilled to hear that. But Steve was a heel too, but he was a babyface most of his career. So was Brian. Brian didn't say anything. But Steve said something about, well, I didn't say anything, but I did thank Jerry later. I thought, that's real. Coming from you, that's a real nice compliment, and I appreciate it. To give that in some kind of foundation as far as my attitude, again, as a heel, you lead the match, and you have a lot to do with that house being out there. Yes, Dusty Rhodes is going to draw it, but he's got to have somebody to draw it against. And if you didn't have a Dusty Rhodes or a Junkyard Dog, a lot of times the heels were the main attraction because people want to see them get their butt kicked. They
just want to see them get beat, yeah.
Right. Yes, they want to see them get the butt kicked. So in either role, whether you're a major player or you're just co-player with that babyface, you're still necessary out there. Mm. And the thing is, babyface doesn't have to figure out how to keep his credibility. The promotion's going to do that for him. Heel, you got to figure out how to keep your heat when you're getting beat.
Right.
And if you don't know how to do it while in the arena, if you have to depend on coming back on TV every week and have the promotion get your heat back on you, well, you can't guarantee they're going to be able to do that. So you have to do what you can in the house shows. And I developed that ability over the years where I could get beat. By the time I got out of the ring, I still had most of my heat back. Again, I'm not trying to put myself over, but thank you, Jerry, for saying that. I appreciate it. All these years I left the business and been retired from it. It's nice to come back and hear somebody, offer you a compliment.
Sure.
And yeah, that was good. But Danny was. Again, he was far more accomplished than me. Than what else should we talk about, my friend?
Well, sir, we're running kind of long. We're getting to the end of the tour, though. We've finished up the list of talent here. Man, look at the hodgepodge, as is the case usually with Japanese tours, though. You go from someone like George the Animal Steele to Luchador Mil Mascaras to amateurs turned pro like Bob Roop, Bob Backlund, Danny Hodge, the Masked Destroyer, who is now welcomed by the Japanese fans. A true hodgepodge of gaijin talent on this tour. Don't want to forget Sandy Scott as well. So lots of great stars here on this fun tour in Japan. But all good things come to an end. And you leave the country of Japan, but you do not immediately return to the States. Actually, after this, at the end of July, you're going to take off back to Australia for, I believe this is your third tour. And this time you're working for a third promoter, Tony Coloni. And we've talked about this tour in the past and everything that went along with it. So I'm sure we'll touch on it on the next episode a little bit. But I believe on the next episode too, you're going to take off somewhere in September back to the States here in 1974. And you're going to be working for Jim Barnett and Company down in the Georgia territory, the old Georgia Wars era, guys. Everybody's been waiting for this, asking, hey, Bob was part of that too? Bob Roop is literally the Forrest Gump of professional wrestling because he was everywhere when shit was going down. Now, coincidence?
Did you think brought some of that shit with me?
I was going to say, coincidence? I don't know. But again, here in the Georgia Wars now, of course, for those who don't know, Ray Gunkel, who had a big percentage in the old Georgia territory, passes away. And of course, that goes to his wife, Ann Gunkel. And of course, the men of pro wrestling say, we can't have a female running a wrestling promotion. So they kind of try to push her out. Ann Gunkel continues to run the territory, but they open up their own NWA Georgia promotion here. And one of the men coming in, big bad Bob Roop, to run off that poor little beautiful Ann Gunkel out of the Georgia territory. So you're going to be running opposition to Ann and Company here with the NWA and Jim Barnett. We'll get into all of that next time on the show, I have no doubt. And then once you leave Georgia, it's back to Florida for quite a stay. So we've got lots cooking here as we continue on.
Well, you know why I was brought there, right?
I've heard stories, and I want to save it, though. So
okay. Well, I was brought there to be a shooter.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can offer that.
Yes.
That's not telling them what too much.
Yeah.
I was supposed to be a enforced strong arm guy.
Right.
That's why they brought me there.
Yeah. And now we'll talk a lot more on that because I have a few questions in regards to that on the next episode. So yeah, I'll see if there's something in the Colony run there in Australia that we didn't touch on the first time around. Maybe we can revisit that a little bit, but I'm really interested into getting into that Georgia War era because that was some big stuff. That was some heavy stuff, in the history of wrestling there. Basically, two big promotions have the opportunity to continue or take over that territory down there in Atlanta. And so we'll see what happens, guys. Either that or you guys can just go do your digging. You got a week to go learn your history, but we'll tell it from Bob Roop's point of view and see what happens while you're there. Anyway, Bob, you're going to stay there from September through November. So you're there for a few months anyway, and we'll talk about how you were brought in and why you left so abruptly. It seems like that happens quite a bit. But we got that and so much more to cover next time here on the Wrestling Stoop.
Well, I want to say one thing. I never got let go in my career. Well, I did when I tried to go opposition to Shire. Once he found out, he let me go. Once Brian Fuller, we'll get there. But once the promoter found out I was trying to, it's not called stealing, it's called a hostile takeover. That's just business. It's a business term. Once I tried that, of course, I got let go. But it wasn't because of my ability in the ring or lack thereof. Mm-hmm. So I just want to make that clear. I was never fired for anything I did in the ring.
Right.
It was for my action behind the scenes. So anyway, thanks to everybody who's out there listening to us today. And I hope you've been with us before. Or if not, we'll be with us after this. Back next week. Sounds like it's going to be a good show, Ray.
Well, you got the stories, Bob. I got the time. We'll be back again very soon, guys. Again, the Georgia Wars, circa 1974. Bob Roop coming in to try to put down that poor little Ann Gunkel. My God, we got to have a conversation offline about this, Bob. I'm just very ashamed of you. Anyway, we're gonna get rolling here this week, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed the All Japan Tour 1974 here with Bob. The next time we visit Japan, we're going to be working for their opposition. Man, you're up to no good at all times. Working for Antonio Inoki and the New Japan promotion. That's a little bit ways off, but for right now, guys, we're going to wrap things up. Bob, once again, thank you so much for the great stories here this week.
Well, thank you, Ray, for setting up the format and bearing with me while I go off on some tangent and go to another, not just another backyard. I go off into another dimension somewhere. So I thank you for putting up with that.
Oh, absolutely.
You stay well, my friend.
All right, guys, that's going to wrap things up here this week. But in the meantime and in between time, I encourage everybody to go out there and follow friend Mr. Bob Roop over at Facebook.com/PoorBobRoop. And you can find me, Ray Russell. Follow me on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. But most of all, I encourage everybody to go over to Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. So many great gifts there, including early show releases, digital downloads, video casts now available, and so much more. Check it out over at Patreon. Help support the brand. And until next time, on behalf of Bob, we ask you guys to hold tight and see where we head next time. Right here on the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop.